Hi, my name is Ryan Dienhart, and today we're going to be discussing the fiscal cliff and sequestration. To start off, we're going to define what the fiscal cliff means to myself, us as students studying this topic, and for the everyday average American. The fiscal cliff, the way I describe it is if you're looking at a graph of federal spending, it tops off, levels off, goes up or down on that graph just like anything else. And the cliff, that nickname cliff, the word comes from I would say the spike or drop off in spending cuts and tax increases that took effect of January 1st of this year. Those spending cuts and tax increases, literally on the graph, the line shoots up or down, giving it the image of a cliff. So I guess that's where we got the name. That best describes what it exactly means, just basically the tax increases and spending cuts that took effect January 1st. How did this all start? Well, it goes back to the summer of 2011 with the Budget Control Act that was put in place to try and stop the raising of the debt ceiling. It started with trying to bring both sides of Congress together, the Republicans and Democrats, to try and come up with a deficit spending plan that would take effect this year. They had, essentially a year and a half to get it done, and as we all saw in the news and media, it came to the last hour and beyond the deadline to pass it through. Essentially, Republicans wanted to cut spending and avoid tax increases, while Democrats took a mixed approach, combination, I guess you should say, of tax increasing and spending cuts. There were different outcomes that could have taken place from all this, starting back in 2011. Some said if Mitt Romney had been elected, he could have had a chance to come up with his own budget plan, thus putting off this fiscal cliff scenario. But with the re-election of Obama and Obamacare, if that's how you want to call it, his new health care plan, the fiscal cliff came to fruition of this year, of January 1st, and that's what we were faced with the re-election of Obama. Basically, on January 1st, Congress did avoid the fiscal cliff per se by going through with Obama's tax increases with the new health care plan, repealing much or many of the Bush tax cuts that had been in place for years, and some other specific steps, I guess policies that were put into place, increasing the payroll tax for those over $100,000 that make over $100,000. I think it was up to $113,000, having a payroll tax increase, repealing the Bush tax cuts for the rich, essentially those making over $400,000 a year, and an increase on taxes for investment income. Also, more on our level, I guess, for those married couples, the average family household with children, and those making between $50,000 and $200,000 a year. The average family, which constitutes approximately 80%, where the figures I have found, will pay higher taxes. So across the board, it seems everybody's going to be paying higher taxes, especially the average middle-income family. It also ended the tax breaks for certain businesses, which was a huge scare for a lot of businesses, all the way down to mom-and-pop shops. And like I had mentioned before, did start the tax increases for Obamacare. What Congress could have done to avoid the fiscal cliff? Well, they could have extended the expiration dates for many of Bush's prior tax cuts that had been in place for years, but that failed to take place, and now we went forth with the tax increases that we had on January 1st. What did they omit? Well, the fiscal cliff omitted a long-term plan, essentially, for decreasing the $16 trillion in debt that the country currently has. It may have a short-term effect for this year until we reach the debt ceiling again later this year, but long-term, the the discussion now is that I watch and hear is that what is this going to do for the long road ahead with the $16 trillion that we currently have in debt. It's seen as a temporary fix, so I don't know, they seem to have admitted any long-term strategy, which has been in the forums as this is the big problem, and we're just again putting a temporary band-aid on the bigger dam of issues that we have. Did additional action take place in March? No, I have found some 10-month programs that were put in place for this year to basically cut spending and raise revenue. Again, kind of a temporary fix for this year, an additional action to kind of freeze some of these cuts, but nothing significant. And this leads me to my last point of discussion, is sequestration. So what action took place was essentially March 1st, the sequester, which is going to have significant and some ill effects for many Americans and a lot of the federal agencies that help protect our borders and air travel. So more specifically on that, on the sequester, to start off, a lot of DoD cuts in funding for programs, not for pay per se, or anything that's going to affect overseas combat forces or wartime program, or I guess wartime operational strategies, but domestically. For instance, I work at Rolls-Royce, which is a DoD contractor. We make aircraft engines for all sorts of fighter jets and helicopters for the military. Well, with the sequester, they are going to now cut the spending for DoD contractors such as Rolls-Royce. And they've sent out emails from corporate advising us of these changes and the effects it's going to need to have. Well, we're going to lose employees that are going to get laid off because essentially we're not being paid the money from the military and the government to make these aircraft engines anymore for military aircraft. So, domestically and locally in Indianapolis, it cuts jobs potentially and funding for companies like Rolls-Royce that make components for the military. Also, I've heard National Guardsmen in the area are going to be on furlough, much like some other federal employees. Basically, 1 day a week they lose pay. So, you add that up over annual income over a year, that's a lot. So, federal furloughs, again, cutting into federal agencies such as the TSA, Border Patrol, basically, cutting the funds for more employees, longer lines at the airport, less patrols along the Arizona, California border and Texas, for border protection. And also domestically low-income programs for low-income families. Education programs for elementary school-age children are also going to be cut. So to end this, is sequester a good idea with when addressing the fiscal cliff overall? Well, at this point, I don't know. What other options do we have other than sequester? To cut into federal programs, federal agencies, I don't think is a good idea. Overall, should we be taking away from low-income programs for the poor and for children? Yes and no. For example, I think already some public programs for the states as far as unemployment and other benefits, welfare, we need to kind of corral that. That's a potential option. Too much spending, there's too much leniency in those programs, I should say. Those are cuts right there. We can kind of refine those programs and restrict those programs even more so. But again, long term, it's going to make a big difference. I don't know. I don't think so. But right now, they're just doing furloughs, and they're cutting in every federal program they can. So, I guess, again, long-term, is that going to help? I doubt it. In the big picture, the big scheme of things, all it's really going to do, take away days of pay from a lot of federal employees, take away employees from the TSA and other federal agencies, and where I work right now, cut employees at Rolls-Royce that are, trying to make a living. So, it's a complicated topic, complicated subject to understand. I tried to explain it in the simplest terms and define it in the simplest ways. You know, it was hard for me to wrap my head around, you know, all we watch on CNN and TV, newspaper, and you know, like for me at work is hear what, you know, fiscal cliff and sequester. Well, to define those and go into detail is not the easiest of things to do. So at the federal government level, you know, they're in a tough bind, just as every American is. They're not as financially in a tough bind, but they've got some decisions and topics they've got to face to address this fiscal cliff that has come and passed, and we will be experiencing for the rest of this year. Thanks for listening. Appreciate your time. Thank you.